Brown says, get that India. Big boy.
Call an ambulance! Maybe call a police! Oh, what a shot! What a shot! Campbell killer!
Hello and welcome back to another news edition of the Tip Sheet Podcast. As always, I'm your host, John, also known as 4020. Join me to break down everything that's happening in the NRL, and for the Parramatta Eels, my good mates, Sixties and Quint. Didn't get the chocolates against the Brisbane Broncos on the weekend, boys. I thought we played pretty well, with all that said, although that seemed to be a controversial opinion on the various parts of the internet. And, the old Eel Illuminati that is TCT in action, holding the club back and not letting them get the win there and beyond. But, boys, well, we're not being puppet masters in the shadows and holding the club back. How you guys doing?
Mate, we are the dark overlords of the NRL. But look, I'm doing particularly well, John. It's it's not great that we're coming off a loss with the Eels, but I think there were some positives. I don't want to have that as an acceptable thing, just to have some positives in a loss. But that's where we're at with that game. The good news from our perspective this last couple of days is on the 40-20 front. For you, John, an award's come in. And this week, it's come in from Europe, from Lithuania, where you have received the gong for most entertaining musical interlude in a Parramatta Eels supporter podcast recorded in Western Sydney.
It's about damn time I got my flowers. Thank you, Lithuania. Do all this hard work and cut up these various YouTube and Spotify segments, and no one says anything. No one says thank you, 40, even though you guys definitely say thank you, 40. But, to get a little bit of acknowledgement out there in the wide world, and Lithuania of all places, smack damn bang in the Baltic states in the middle of Europe, that really means something to me. So thank you, Lithuania. Thank you for giving me my flowers.
Mate, especially in Eurovision week too. I think it's should be inspirational to us. It should be inspirational to you to surge ahead with some of the brilliant musical pieces that you find for us. So well done, mate. And now I've got to move over to you, Clint, because it wasn't the match that had you sitting there on Friday night with gritted teeth. It was, it was in fact you doing your best to cope with the night out, having had all 4 wisdom teeth removed. Mate, how you doing? Have you got full movement back in your mouth, or you still got that grimace on your face?
I don't have full movement, but I'm certainly a lot better than I was last Friday. And I just want to give a shout out because we had some well wishes in the comments from a fortnight ago when I was off, passing on their well wishes. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you sending the positive vibes my way. And I'm largely recovered now, although as the day, I've noticed probably the past 2 days, although I've returned somewhat not to something that resembles normal talking, by day's end, I have a bit of talking fatigue. It sounds like the weirdest thing in the world to describe, and I default back to that slack-jawed yokel state that you guys saw me in on Friday.
I'm not going to lie, Quint. I completely forgot that you had your wisdom teeth out on Friday night, and I thought you were just practicing your ventriloquism. You were doing a bang-up job.
It was, for people watching, maybe we should be going towards having a video of us on the screen for our YouTube clips, because anyone that would have seen Clint on Friday night, that is a great way of describing it, John, the ventriloquism act, because there was like the gritted teeth and talking through the gritted teeth like this.
Did very, very well, must be said.
Got gear. Okay, fellas. Well, look, we do move on. And, of course, as we move on, we must send out a thanks to our sponsors, Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta. Thanks to Greg and the team for constantly being behind what we're doing here at the Cumberland Throw. And not only that, they're great Eels supporters, just like that 17,500 people that turned out on Friday night in the pouring rain to cheer the Eels in their efforts to beat the Broncos. So, again, congratulations to those people who fronted up on Friday night. And fellas, I think we're just about ready for the news to begin.
News team, assemble!
And fellas, we do have to start the news with the somber news of the passing of legendary Eels player Ron Lynch, player number 197. We do have a tribute post to him on the Cumberland Throw. The Eels have put out their tributes as well. There's plenty that's been said in the general mainstream media as well. Ron was instrumental in turning around the fortunes of the Eels in the early 1960s, a country player originally from Young and then came through from Forbes into the country team, and from there New South Wales, and then the Eels picked him up, and the rest is history. He had a great career at Parramatta, earned Australian representation, just a tough, no-nonsense lock forward or second rower, playing in the era where Johnny Raper had a mortgage on the lock spot in the Australian teams, and still Ron, he earned 12 caps for Australia, nicknamed Thirsty because he didn't mind a drink. He was really one of the great characters of the game. He's ended up as having life membership for the Eels that was awarded in 1970 while he was still playing. In 2003, he was included as an Eels Hall of Fame player. Great. There's fondness that people recall him with. Anyone who watched him in that era recalls fondly just how tough he was, how he really took the game to the opponents in both attack and defence. He scored a freak try in the Parramatta's very first semi-final win. I think it was 1963. First time they won a finals match. I think he got this rebound off the crossbar, I think it was, that he was able to catch and then score the try. We had some great recollections, some anecdotes that people added to our tribute post, people who watched him back in the day. And the one that I found was really special was one of our readers recalled how in a match at Henson Park, he picked up the Parramatta fullback, I think it was Laurie Wakefield, who was injured. And, of course, back in those days, there were no medicabs. There wasn't the trainers and all the doctors that would tend assistance. It used to be St John's Ambulance. And they would come out onto the field and render assistance, and so that the fullback could be treated. He picked up Wakefield, the fullback, and carried him to the sideline for the treatment. And you can imagine a player of that era doing something like that, and it's just an indication of who he was, his leadership, and we send out our sympathies to all of the loved ones of Ron Lynch. He'll forever be player number 197 for the Parramatta Eels.
Yeah, well said, Sixties. And unfortunately, it feels like the veils and the remembrance posts are coming thick and fast right now, with a lot of important figures from that era and beyond now reaching that sort of timeline where they're passing. So very, very tragic for the club and obviously his friends and family. And like you said, our best wishes go out to them and the Parramatta Eels too, who have lost a really important piece of their club history.
Absolutely. And I certainly, my father would speak in awe of Ron Lynch, and not only, for his toughness, but also with a few yarns about, the sort of character that Ron Lynch was. So, thinking of him, his family and friends. Moving on, fellas, I just wanted to refer people to the podcast that we put out as a standalone on Sunday, featuring Steve Georgalis. We talk not just about pathways, but we talk about what's happening to the players coming out of junior reps and transitioning into, for the boys, either jersey flag or for the girls, the extended squad for the Harvey Norman New South Wales Premiership. We talk about the Jets program and what happens with the people in the Jets program. And also, in case people didn't catch it, John, you ran through some of the Parramatta Eels players from the Pathways program who were successful in being selected for the City team for this weekend's City Country Games. And I'm just going to quickly run through that. So in the 16s boys for the City team, we've got Cyrus Bloomfield, Samuel Polly, Michael Nauer and Talon Rosati. For the 18s boys, we got Josiah Funa Iuta. Going to the 17s girls, we got Kylea Gray, Logan Lamusu, Bailey Marchong, Aaliyah Scrivens, Daniel Seckold, and Fontaine Tafuga. That's quite a representation. And going along with that, we have the coach for the City 17s in Charlotte Henry. So congratulations to Shah and all of those girls. And in the 19s girls, we've got Lindsay Tui, River Lialo, Rory Mueller, and Raffaello Perigo. So quite a decent representation in those teams participating this weekend. I think it's across both Saturday and Sunday at Leichhardt Oval. So we wish them all well. Moving along again, fellas, we're just starting to get a bit of news of the size of the Eels' offer to Blaize Talagi. It's obviously been big news in the last week that Blaize had declined the option that was in his favour to remain at the Eels to test what's happening in the market. And the news is out there in the media that Parramatta has tabled an offer of around $1.1 million over 3 years. John, I'll go to you first. What's your take on that sort of offer?
I don't think that's a bad baseline to work from. We know that the player market for young talents has exploded in the NRL, not too dissimilar to what we see in American sports, where young guys are getting paid more and more than ever as clubs jostle and compete aggressively to secure signatures. So I don't think that's a bad baseline for the Parramatta Eels to try and work on a deal. I can also see why the player manager might have looked at that and said, well, I can see why they would go to the open market because they think they can get more. But as much as I've been critical of recruitment retention, I don't think 1.1 over 3 is a bad baseline to be working from. I think that, you talk about, in the past it's been said that sometimes our opening offers have been too low or too far away from where, someone like Isaiah Papali might have wanted to be at. But looking at that, I think that is definitely a workshoppable amount for the Eels. I don't think that's a disrespectful offer to a kid that's played, single-digit NRL games at the stage that it was tabled. So, yeah, I'm certainly not critical of the club in that regard. I think that it's going to take more to get the deal done, especially since he's gone to the open market now and he's going to command some very aggressive offers from elsewhere. But, yeah, again, I don't fault the club in this regard. I think that's a good baseline offer.
Yeah, Clint, it must be challenging for a club to come up with a figure that is based, well, to a large extent on potential, because when you're talking about a young player that's only just made their debut, to start to come up with those sorts of figures, you are talking about potential. We believe that it's potential that will be fulfilled with Blaize, but nonetheless, you still are talking about a level of, uncertainty of what's going to happen in the future. Do you think also believe that's a good baseline offer to start with?
I do, and deals like this are always a calculated risk, and you have to weigh it up from both sides. And it's everyone will be the messiah and an expert on whether this is a good deal or not after the fact, because that's really the only point in time in which any of us will have the opportunity to judge whether it was good business or not. So you've got to balance all these things out and make an offer which is enticing, while also trying to keep the club's finances, in this case the salary cap, in balance, so that you can factor in the other 29 spots of the roster that you have to fill in, and try and strike that happy medium. For me, that this offer is about that, given that you are taking a calculated risk on potential that we believe will be fulfilled. Obviously, it's within the player and the player manager's best interest to try and get as much as they believe that they can. Likewise, it's in the club's best interest to try and retain him for the least amount, so that they can have as much talent around him as possible to help him fulfill that potential. And that should also always be a key consideration for the player, because the more money that they have, the less money is available for other players around them, and it can ergo affect their earning capacity and earning potential in the future as well. So there's a balancing act that goes on both sides of the discussion table and the negotiation table here.
Yeah, and without going too deep into it, we understand where both parties are coming from. So we understand that the club is doing its best to get a player signed on the best possible respectful value for them. We understand that the player agent is going to be looking for the best return for the player. I also hope that the player agent is looking for the total best outcome for the player. And for me, that involves, things like the future opportunities for the player, for having a player where he is happy. So if the player's happy at a club, you'd like to think that there is, look, it's always said that when a player's happy at a club, it's going to take a significantly greater offer to take them out of the club. If a player's unhappy at the club, then it becomes a different proposition. So we have to assume from some of the media that came out after the game on Friday night that the comments attributed to Blaize are that he is very happy to be representing the Parramatta Eels in his football. Look, we obviously have a selfish view of this as well. We would be hoping that Blaize can be retained by the club. It would be obviously very disappointing, and we're probably making an understatement that were he to leave. We understand what happens in modern football, and we'll just leave it to the club and to the agent to work out an outcome that we hope will be in the Eels' favour. Fellas, moving on. I did mention before about the over 17,000 that were at the game on Friday night. I just again wanted to mention that because I know, talking to you, Clint, on the night, we were both surprised at the numbers that were in the stand, given the miserable weather that was there on the night, and also the fact that the Eels hadn't been travelling too well. It was really a sign of supporters getting behind the team at what is a difficult time.
Certainly, and I did feel a degree of cautious optimism in the stands before the game as well, because everyone was kind of interested to see how the kids would go, and I know that we spoke Sixties prior to the game, and we said quietly, if they're within 20 or less points, they will have made a good account of themselves. Some of these kids that were out there. and it felt like they did exactly that. And a couple of different bounces of the balls, and I'm probably sort of leading into our points, our final takes on last Friday coming up here a little early, but a couple of different bounces of the ball, and they may have pulled off a win, but the crowd was obviously out there in support, and it felt like a little bit. It's weird. Even at 17,000, it felt like a little bit more of a vocal crowd of maybe 10,000 more than that at certain points in the game. Certainly in trying to in that first half, trying to get some penalties for the side and that. But it was a good show up of the Eels faithful, all things considered.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm going to give a shout out to the club because we've complained before about that ridiculous recorded chant that's played, and I reckon there were very few times where they played that on Friday night. They let the crowd produce the noise, and the couple of times that they did use it were probably at the appropriate times in the match. So I think kudos to the club for reeling that back, because we know how much we hate them trying to create I think a false atmosphere at the game. The atmosphere was there anyway on Friday night, and I think that the club, in doing what they did, helped to contribute to that. Just let the match unfold, let the excitement of the game unfold, because there actually was no shortage of big moments in the game, and they didn't always work out our way, but it certainly wasn't through lack of trying. John, just your final takes on the game. You were impressed with the game plan, but unfortunately those errors were costly.
Yeah, different personnel in key positions with no Mitchell Moses, no Quinton Gufferson. I think we adapted our game plan nicely. We utilised our fullback in different looks that we would if Gufferson was in place, which allowed us to be a little bit more aggressive, closer to the middle. I'm not saying like through the ruck, but like just like further in from the sideline. And I thought Blaize did that job quite well. Scored one try, had another taken back correctly on the back of Kelma Tuolangi getting his decoy run wrong. So, yeah, we made some really nice attacking adjustments. That's not even including some of the different options we're throwing with forwards being used as fulcrum points and some different interplays of passes there. So, really nice game plan. Unfortunately, some individual lapses let us down. Some bad luck let us down. I mean, the odds of a ball bouncing up twice perfectly into the hands of some of the fastest players on the Brisbane team is, it's a bit reflective of how we've been travelling in general. Yes, we've been making mistakes and letting ourselves down, but there's been some very bad luck, or significant bad luck, rather. So, yeah, look, I understand why people were upset coming out of that game. I also think that the scoreline wasn't a reflection of how close that contest was. I thought the Parramatta Eels had the Broncos rattled. There was some good physicality in the forwards. We only got beaten for pace once in terms of like outright backline manoeuvres, and that was when Dean Mariner scorched our left edge and also got Blaize of the in and away down the sideline. So there was a bit of teaching tape there for Blaize. I know everyone's hurting and people want the win, but there was some vitriolic backlash, I think, after that result that wasn't warranted. And yeah, like I said, in the lead-up 60s, other games have already influenced outcomes, and I think future games influence outcomes for players and staff and everyone. But coming to this game, I was in a neutral mindset, and I came away thinking that the preparation was excellent. The execution was good throughout the first half, 3/5 of the game, and we tailed away a bit again. Which is it dropping your heads when things go against you? Are we perhaps a little bit underdone in terms of fitness? I don't know. But obviously bad luck contributed to that too. So we just got to go out there and continue to try and control what we can control, and the result will come. And this is a case of building the process for the Parramatta Eels now. And I think that what we saw against Manly, what we saw against Brisbane, is a case of good process by preparation. And it's just now on the players to take that last step and almost complete the process and get the result.
Yeah, look, I think anything that I want to add at this stage, I might add when it comes to us dissecting Team List Tuesday, because there are some takes that maybe relate to selections there. So, Clint, is there anything you want to add about Friday, or or are you
Yeah,
going to leave yours as well till the team go through the team
uh,
list?
I might just add and echo John's sentiments that there legitimately was a case of bad luck. I mean, two runaway tries, a freakish put down by Selwyn Cobbo. In another game, those balls aren't dropped and those runaway tries aren't scored. Selwyn Cobb, the ball skips over the dead ball line. We see this type of thing happen in any other given game in any other week. Sometimes the bounce of the ball goes your way, and it certainly did a few times for Brisbane, fortuitously. And then sometimes it goes against you, as it did for us in making the mistakes that created those opportunities. Because there's other games where those balls hit the player and they safely take the catch. They go through the hole themselves. You look at the two opportunities that Bailey Simonson had. In another game, he grounds that first opportunity, and the second opportunity he dummies and goes over himself, or the pass finds a player. And suddenly we could be looking at a situation where the scoreline was completely reversed, and it's the Eels 30, Brisbane 16. So sometimes that's just footy.
Yeah, and I would suggest as well that the errors didn't come from any sort of impatience in the play, but rather issues with execution. And it was definitely a game where the Eels made the decision that they were going to take the game to the Broncos.
Mm-hmm.
And I can guarantee you that there's been a little bit of feedback that the Broncos were really feeling the sort of contact that was delivered to them on Friday night. But, fellas, we press on now very quickly with a quick roundup of the lower grade games. The Flegg travelled down to Melbourne on Saturday to take on the Storm, and there was, I believe, the late withdrawal of Josh Lynn from the team, and a little bit of a reshuffle that saw Devonte Vivella added to the centres. Arpa Twiddle then went from centre to halfback, and Matthew Hunter was playing at 5'8". Saxon Pryke was moved back from New South Wales Cup to the Jersey Flegg. They went down 20-4 to the Storm. They were behind, I think it was 16-0 at halftime. I haven't had a look at any footage at this stage, so I can't really offer too much on the performance of the team. We then go to Sunday, and the New South Wales Cup team registered their third win from their last four appearances. And again, I'll repeat, the only loss they've had in that period was a most unlucky loss to the Roosters when they were penalised. I think it was 9-1 in that game. It was either 8-1 or 9-1. It was something completely lopsided like that. They won 31-24 against the Bears, and the scoreline, I will say, flattered the Bears. There was great performances from, first of all, Matt Dury. I thought he was, along with the halfback, was...
The mustard.
Sorry?
The mustard.
The mustard, Dejan Arce. So, along with Arce, it was... Those two were probably close to best on field. Bud's Arthur was right up there as well. He was toying with the opposition out of dummy half. Matt Dury just was power personified. His carries, I don't know if there's any stats on that game as yet, John, but his post-contact meters must have been really high, because he troubled the Bears with every carry. It was just, very, very powerful stuff from him. Dejan, I guess he must have forced BA's hand in team selections this week, and we'll get onto that in a moment, because he was also strong the previous week in the victory over the Blacktown Workers Seagulls. Sorry, not the previous week, the previous match.
Mm-hmm.
So, Dejan Arce, he was in a little bit of form. That was easily his best performance that I've ever seen for Parramatta in any grade. Just a very, very dominant halfback performance. There are a lot of good performers across the park. I thought that Makahesi Makatoa, who dropped back, I thought he was very solid. I thought Ethan Martin came into the team on the wing last week, and he scored a couple of tries. First try was fairly straightforward, just backing up, supporting, getting the ball down. But the second try was a try that pretty much was an Ethan Martin special, where he managed to bump off and avoid the first offender when he was given the ball about 12 metres out from the line, something like that. And then with defenders in front of him after he bumped them off, somehow he beat the defenders who were on the line and seemed to be close to the corner. He beat them to the corner, got the ball down. So he was really, in form. But Dan Keir, I thought, was a great contributor as well in the forwards. Charlie Geimer, as solid as he always is. It was just a really good team performance in the New South Wales Cup, and they really deserved the win. And they have a bit of form going forward, and hopefully that good form continues. So that's where we are with the lower grade results from last week. So, John, I think it's time for you to take us through Team List Tuesday.
Let's get right into it with the Eels naming a couple of changes as they take on the Melbourne Storm in Magic Round, and Brad Arthur has named his team as such. At fullback, no surprises, young gun Blaize Talagi has number one on his back for the second week running after wasn't without mistakes, but a very positive showing against the Brisbane Broncos. Mike Acevo, he's still on the team by virtue of a lack of wing depth, but he'll be on one wing with Bowie Simonson on the other. Will Penasini and Sean Russell are in the centres. In the halves, you already mentioned it, but Dejan Arce gets the call-up after a sensational outing in the New South Wales Cup. He'll partner Dylan Brown. I imagine that they'll use the same configuration of Dylan on the right and Dejan on the left, because that's what we saw last time Dejan was in NRL this year. So it'll be interesting to see, but keep an eye on that one in case there is a swap. Front row, Reagan Campbell-Gillard, Junior Barlaw. Junior, of course, could drop back to the interchanges we've seen so often this season. Joey Lussick is the number 9. Sean Lane on the left edge. Sixties, I'll let you talk about that shortly, but Ryan Madison's on the right. Jermaine Hopgood at lock forward. I've noticed that Jermaine's getting a lot of origin chatter, fellas. All those sort of early media origin team lists are featuring him on the interchange, so watch that space. On the interchange, speaking of, Bryce Cartwright named again this week. We hope he can get through to Sunday. Big inclusion for the team if he can go, but he's clearly not near 100%. Makesi Makatoa, Joe Ofungahi and Kelma Tuolangi round out the rotation forwards. No bench utilities, I have to wait and see what happens there. Brendan Hands is named as the 18th man, with Morgan Harper, Ethan Sanders, Witteramu Greg and Luca Moretti rounding out the extended roster. Of note, no Brendan Hands in that Cup team list, which means he's almost certainly going up to Brisbane as the 18th man. Also gives BA an option to make that late change ahead of kickoff if he wants the utility, although you think he would have named him if that was the case. But yeah, 60s, I know you've got a couple of bones to pick in this team list, so I'll let you start the discussion.
Well, we saw a change that was made that was, I'm going to say, was a similar sort of change to the week before. I regarded Morgan Harper as unlucky to be dropped after the loss to the Sea Eagles. He was nowhere near the player who would have been responsible for the loss. We know that there were others that made individual errors which were costly in that game. In this week's team list, I think that Ethan Sanders is unlucky to be out of the team. I think there's a couple of others that are very lucky to still be in the team, and we may well be talking about the same players in this instance as we were the week before. I guess there's been a similar instance with both players who were dropped, in that a player in the grade below them made their case very strongly for a recall. So the week before, we had Sean Russell, who played an extremely good game for the Eels New South Wales Cup team in their win against Blacktown Workers Seagulls, and he had been switched to centre, and he ended up playing at centre in first grade the following week as a result of that performance. Now, we've just seen a couple of standout performances in consecutive weeks at halfback from Dejan Arce. And as I said, the game against the North Sydney Bears was easily the best game I've ever seen from Dejan Arce. And I guess he just made it impossible for BA to ignore his claims to be elevated to first grade. And unfortunately, that means that a player that maybe shouldn't have been identified as one to be dropped has had to make way for a player who's had some exceptional form in recent weeks in New South Wales Cup. So that's the first thing I wanted to address. The other points are, of course, there's been a lot of talk around the form of Micah Sevo and Sean Lane. And we've talked a lot about Sevo. We've acknowledged what he adds to the team in the red zone, but we're getting virtually nothing from Micah in yardage and kick returns. Absolutely nothing. And John, you've spoken a lot about what you see from his carries. Can you just go over that again? I know it's going over ground that we have covered, but what our takes are, what you see as the area where he's going wrong in his work at that end of the field.
Yeah, so as I said in previous podcasts, it comes down to two main focus points. First is leverage, where the low man wins, and that is just a fundamental of pretty much any oblong ball code, whether it's NFL, rugby union, rugby league. The lower point of contact, the lower center of gravity is going to win the collision more often than not. And if you watch Micah go in the collision, he's very upright. He tends to get almost speared because of it. There's a lot of driving tackles that drop him on his backside. So that's the first problem I have with the way he handles his ruck work, which is ironic because he often gets low when trying to score a try because he wins those collisions. And the second point is, if you watch him and you compare him to some of the other premier rucking wingers, obviously the Penrith duo, guys from Cronulla, the Warriors, etc., he's running into the strong point of the tackle zone. He'll run towards players and into their shoulders, which allows for that, again, winning that collision concept, for them to make the strong initial contact to win the battle of momentum in a given tackle. If you watch the other guys, they will use footwork, they'll use their ability to lean into gaps to get into the exterior point of a tackle zone where you're relied to use your arms. And so that's a combination of footwork, of angling your runs, and of just sort of poking your head through between players. You run at the space, not the face. These are all very, basic football concepts. Anyone that's played the game would have heard all these idioms and, basic concepts. But, you look at Bailey Simonson, he can be guilty of running a little bit too sideways at times, but if you watch him, he'll use his footwork and a bit of pace to get into the positive zones for running the ball, whereas Micah is too upright and runs right into the teeth of the defense, and that's why he's getting dropped on his backside more often than he isn't.
And, of course, he is turning the body as he's hitting the tacklers.
Yeah, and that's just another loss of momentum.
Yeah, because in that position, he's not going for a hit or a spin. He's just simply bracing for contact, and he's then taking out any potential for him to keep the legs pumping if he does force a break in the tackle, which he's not going to. But if somehow the players fell off him, there's only one direction he's going to go. It's straight to the ground because he's literally into a surrender position.
No contact balance, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you pay attention to the likes of Bailey Simonson and Will Penasini when they're doing these yardage carries, is that they're doing what John just talked about then, and they're then fighting in any contact that's there. The legs keep pumping, and you see a number of times where they actually pull out of the tackle, where they've done enough. Maybe they've only got arms on them, and then the legs keep pumping, and next thing they're out the other side, or they get more post contact meters. You're not getting post contact meters out of Mike Acevo down that end. So I think if you had, and this is what it comes down to, selection options outside of Micah, then you'd probably see a change to the team list. It wasn't a question of errors this week in being disappointed in his performance. It was a matter of, did we get anything out of him in that game?
He had. I think we were looking at the numbers in the post game 60s. Like the actual involvement rate wasn't bad this week. It was 15 carries, but I think it was 15 carries for like 108 meters. It worked out to like less than 7 meters a carry, which is absolutely insane for a man that big and that powerful. Like he looks like he is carved from granite, and we've seen him absolutely dispatch fullbacks and wingers with like, cold violence when he's scoring a try. I mean, everyone remembers that he put, I know it happened to him again this year, but he put Tedesco 6 feet underground at the SFS, the old SFS, a few years back. And he can do that in the attacking 20. So why is he, so passive inside the defensive 50? It boggles the mind. He has every tool there. And, I know he's not a, 100-meter athlete in terms of his speed, but he's got highly explosive traits when it comes to 5, 10, 15, 20 meters, this should be his bread and butter, finishing tries and rucking the ball out. Like he is built for it. And yet it's like we don't see it. We only see half of it. It's the attacking football.
Yeah, it's obviously a mindset issue, but the disturbing thing about those figures, John, is that in those meters there were probably about maybe 3 or 4 occasions where he'd taken the kick and he got about 10 meters or more before he got to the opponent. So he was already picking up. Like there was a waiting in that list of runs that he had in those 15 runs where he was getting a lot of meters before he was getting to the defenders. And it then means that the average per run in all those other runs was almost negligible. So it just made it just not a good performance whatsoever in terms of what he was able to deliver in that area. Now, before I get into the other selection that I think most people would want to talk about, Clint, is there anything you'd like to add about Micah and what's been happening with him?
Well, beyond him not doing the red zone work or the ruck work that we need him to do, it's worth noting as an extension of that point that his year-on-year average running meters has gone down considerably over the course of his career. Seed 1 year in 2021, in 2020 rather. So I'm just going to read out some numbers for you. In 2019, he averaged 146 meters per game. In 2020, it was 118. In 2021, it was 130. In 2022, 129. In 2023, 122. And this year, in the 4 games he's played, 101. It's considerably different. It's considerably lower. And for a side that relies on its forward pack, the way that we do, and particularly with the way the game is being played now, we actually need Micah's involvement to go up another 30 to 50 meters a game to afford our forward pack the ability to have the ability to recover so that they can produce effort on effort defensive efforts. So it really the proof is kind of in the statistics there. And obviously he had a great breakout year in his rookie year in 2019, and was making plenty of line breaks from our own half as well. Anything from half breaks to full breaks. And part of that's because there was a lot more link-up play that used to happen between Clint Gustafson and Micah in that year from our own half. But the other part was because of all the points that John made. he was finding the space as opposed to the man, and I don't want to, I'm kind of speculating here, but it almost feels as though since he copped that first knee injury out of Brookvale Oval, I
Yep.
think from a tackle from Brad Parker.
Hank Scorpio, yeah.
Yeah, we just haven't quite seen the same Micah since that point, the guy that would go looking for the gaps and the opportunities in all parts of the field, as opposed to inside the opposition's 10-meter zone.
I mean,
So
I think we all remember the palm off that he did on Blake Ashford,
Blake Ashford.
yeah.
which was like 40 metres out from our line.
Yep.
And he was just like, in that particular run, no one was going to stop him. He was intent on.
And that's the word, intent. Like that.
Yeah,
that
yeah.
2019 season, he ran the ball every time like it was his last carry, whether it was in the goal line or coming off the goal line. And you think about, I mean, you go back 5 years, and obviously plenty of players are in their prime. But in Micah's case, if you had 2019 Micah this year, it doesn't fix other issues in the roster. Don't get me wrong, but how much it would energize the team we have is crazy. Like having that Micah setting the table for the other backs, for the forwards, for the halves, coming out of our own half, making teams hurt when they're trying to tackle him. It is crazy how much that changes the game script for the Parramatta Eels in a given game. Just having an absolute tone setter in the back line when it comes to the ruck work. And yeah.
And then it makes the work of the likes of the Bailey Simons and the Will Penners,
exactly.
already poking through even easier.
It cascades from there, exactly. Having him set the table for his other backs and for the other forwards, it is not the pebble that starts the avalanche. It is like the actual avalanche itself creating other avalanches. It will put into gear so many things. It makes the other backs better. It makes the halves better. It makes the fullback better. It makes the other forwards better. And we are dying for that right now. Dying.
And that's kind of the genesis of the frustration, to bring this conversation full circle, is that we know that the capability is there, and we know what it can produce, even more so under the rule changes that have come into effect since Micah's debuted. How much of an upside that would create for the team.
Yeah, and when you were giving those historical stats there, Clint, it reminded me as well that in 2019 we were coming off a wooden spoon season, and the addition of Micah Sevo and Blake Ferguson on the wings gave us power wingers that we didn't have the year before, and the impact was immediate. The Eels went from being a wooden spoon team to one that surged into the finals, and it was, I mean, there was a couple of other team changes as well, but we needed to get those meters on the flanks, and we got it with those two. And now we are probably one of the poorer performing teams when it comes to the meters of the back five. And so, whilst Micah isn't on his own in terms of, we could get some more meters out of them, he is certainly the one that's producing the lowest returns, and he's the one that we can focus on because the way that he carries the ball isn't conducive to getting any meters at all in yardage. So, that probably should be where we leave it there. We're not looking at a pylon on Micah. We're really trying to work out what is going wrong, because he actually, I mean, due to circumstance, he has a mortgage on that wing spot, and he's well remunerated for that role, and we need him. We need him to be back to that form. We absolutely have to have it. And it's disconcerting that for whatever reason, and we have to put it down that it's a headspace issue. If you've got the physical qualities, if you're the same player that delivered those sort of devastating runs in previous years, it has to be a headspace issue that you're no longer delivering. Now, let's turn to the other player that we just haven't seen the best of this season, and that's Sean Lane. Now, Sean Lane was dreadfully unlucky to not have earned Australian representation in 2022. He was instrumental in getting the Eels to the grand final that year. His game went to a level that there were probably lots of supporters didn't expect. They didn't know that he had that in him. He was, I would argue that without him on the field, they don't beat the Cowboys in that preliminary final in that year. His plays in that game literally dragged the Eels into the grand final in very tough conditions up in Townsville. What we're seeing this year is not a shadow of Sean at his best. And again, we're talking about where we need the best from a player who has produced match-winning performances in the past, been one of the shining lights in the team, and is now a player that has a lot of supporters calling for him to be selected in New South Wales Cup rather than NRL. And again, it has to be a headspace issue, because we're just seeing, like, he's getting the timing of his runs all wrong again. We know that because the ball's going down. And Sean had some problems with this early in his time at the Eels, where when he'd be hitting spaces, it just wasn't timed well and he'd drop the ball. And then when he hit his straps, when everything came together, the lines, the timing, it was all so good, and it just made chaos for opposing defences. We're not seeing any of that right now. We're seeing there's a lot of play. If it's not him, it's around him where there are Eels errors. And we're not seeing those effort-on-effort defensive plays. John, I think it's fair to say we saw some better stats from him against the Broncos. But again, he is in the team, paid as one of the elite players.
Mm-hmm.
I still don't believe we got an elite performance out of him, because, again, there were errors by him or around him, and we just didn't see genuine impact football from him. And we need him to be an impact player. We need him. Obviously, he's in a position where BA expects long minutes, but we need to see more than just a bloke who's, well, I can't even say it that it's workhorse efforts that he's providing, because we see there's times where, like in the Manly game, where if you just get a Jake Trbojevic stroll past you,
that's brutal.
It's so. John, firstly to you, is it too harsh to suggest that Sean is lucky to be selected either? Well, I mean, I thought he might have been moved to the bench this week to try to reduce his minutes and to get him focused on shorter minutes and what he needs to produce in those minutes. Get the impact Sean Lane back into the game. But is it too much to be critical and say, look, he should be playing in New South Wales Cup? Would you have liked to have seen him move to the bench to get that impact player back into form? What's your takes?
No, I think you're very fair in your criticism there. He is a senior player of his squad and has paid money requisite to his position in the roster as a result of that. And we're seeing a short leash in other positions, obviously outside of the wing, where there's just a complete lack of talent to provide the necessary depth to make the changes we'd like to see. But at centre, in the halves, guys have been given a really short leash right now. If someone has got the hot hand in New South Wales Cup and you're, had an average or quiet game, you're on the chopping block. And that's fair enough. This is a team that is looking for change, looking to find a formula to win. And they've been inching towards it on the back of the changes made, both preparatory with the coaching staff and then in-game with the changes made on Team West Tuesday and then into the actual game itself. But Lane has been very lucky. I don't think there's any other way to spin it. I think the injury, the untimely nature of the injury to Bryce Cartwright has stayed the axe in many ways, because I think they want the experience, the seniority there. and they don't want to go too young. And on top of that, Matt Dury, who I know you pointed out had a great game on the weekend, he had another untimely injury prior to that, which put him behind the 8 ball in competing for a spot. So maybe Lane's been, in a way, similar to Micah. He's been the beneficiary of some bad luck elsewhere at the club. But this week, I thought he was very fortunate to hold his spot in the starting team. Maybe there's still legitimate question marks about Bryce's ability to play extended minutes in Magic Round. And between that and Matt Dury only just getting his feet properly back underneath him in Cup, that might have saved Lane's spot in the team. But if there's a quiet game this week, or there's another bad defensive error, or a costly offensive drop, then surely he needs to either be put to the bench or drop the Cup, because he needs to be better. He's paid in a way that reflects his position in the team, and I don't think, like you said, he's given us some workmanlike efforts that have been conflated with bad lapses defensively and offensively, and that's not good enough. We need more than that. Regardless of the errors, we need him to be tilting the field for the Parramatta Eels. And yes, he hasn't been partnered up with his preferred half in Dylan Brown, and there's other issues in the team because of that. But he was, as far as we knew, 60s, he was the guy that helped control that left edge when Dylan was out there. And
yes,
that means that regardless if it's Dylan, if it's Ethan, if it's Dejan, if it's Dan Keir, whoever was on that, half, that he would have been the senior figure helping direct it, and we need to see more of him because of that. And I think this game is make or break for him.
Yeah, and I think that shouldn't be lost. So people that are, that are being critical of Lane, as I am, it shouldn't be lost on us that Lane was really instrumental in helping Dylan Brown to stay focused in games. He was the talker beside Dylan Brown that helped to shape Dylan as a strike weapon for us and to keep him focused in games where he was able to produce some of the moments that he did, and especially in 2022. So we had issues last year where both Lane and Brown were absent for long periods of time for different reasons from the team. But yes, Lane has that aspect to his game as a leader out there on the field. And I wonder, I mean, we can't hear it from up in the stands, but I wonder whether the lack of form is also reflected in whether he's communicating as well out on the field as he has in past seasons. The other thing too is I really need to emphasise to people, because a lot of people may not have seen, would not have seen the performance of Matt Dury in the New South Wales Cup. It was as good a back row performance as you are likely to see. I can't emphasise it highly enough that he just troubled the defence literally with every single carry, and was just refused to be tackled. And we've always known that he runs great lines. And when you combine a great line runner with someone who is just a powerful runner anyway, it makes it a difficult proposition for any defence to handle. And he was, and admittedly, yes, it is only New South Wales Cup, but all you can do is to produce in the grade that you're in. And he produced last week. So there had to be a lot of consideration for his claims this week. Clint, anything that you'd like to add about Sean Lane and maybe what he needs to do to get back to his best form, or whether he needs time in New South Wales Cup to do that?
Well, similar to what we said with Micah, it has to be mental with him. And Sean's taken on, I'm not suggesting that this is the problem, it's just a comment and of an observational comment. But he's taken on a lot of activities and responsibilities outside of footy as well. And it's hard to strike the right balance between obviously your professional duties as a rugby league footballer and everything else that he's going outside his life. And it's not insignificant. He's studying a master's in psychology. There's real demands that come with doing a master's, as any student in those programs will tell you. There's lots of assignments and exams and tests that are constantly going on, and it would be easy to get overwhelmed. And I'm not suggesting that is the case with Sean. I'm sure if you ask him, he'd tell you he's got it all under control. And given the documentary he filmed over the off season, he's very well versed in that space. But that being said, he's also a human, and we're all constantly having to reassess what we can and what we admittedly can't manage at any given point in time in our life, because our our focus shifts all the time, as do our priorities. And you've got to put the number one priority first. And again, I'm not suggesting that's not what he's doing, but it's easy for your attention to be pulled in other directions if your plate's full. So I'm being largely speculative other than anything else here, but it's just something as a consideration that could be a contributing factor.
Yeah, and well said, mate. Look, the only other thing I wanted to touch on this week is dummy half, because we saw Buds Arthur and Charlie Geimer, and Charlie obviously is a back rower or lock, but we saw those two doing the warm-up as part of the Eels preparation on Friday as they're out on the field before the game. What can we read into that? Are we getting closer to Brad Arthur selecting his son in first grade? Because there is a groundswell of opinion amongst supporters that the time is right now for Matt Arthur to make an NRL debut, not necessarily starting, but certainly at least coming off the bench in the NRL and making his first grade debut. John, do you want to add some thoughts to that?
Yeah, I mean, part of me is a little bit sad he wasn't named this week. There would have been some awesome NRL poetry if he'd made his debut in Magic Round, given where Jake made his debut a few years back. But alas, it's not to be. But I told you, and I've told the podcast, that the only concern I've ever had with Matthew Arthur was his size and how they would hold up in senior football. And look, he's never going to be an absolute unit, a dummy half. And to be fair, that is the position where there are invariably the smaller guys on the field in any given season or team. And to his credit, he's still got work to do in terms of bulking up and putting muscle on the frame, but he has been more than fine defensively in the New South Wales Cup this season. He's held his own, and if anything, there's been a noticeable drop-off in the team on both sides of the ball when he's not out there and is getting spelled. So he's held up his end of the deal there. Offensively, he's been incredible. Anyone that has seen him play one or two games, let alone the entire season, knows that he completely dictates the pace of the game for the Parramatta Eels and the opposition when the ball is in hand. The Eels' slow start to the season in the Cup was no fault of his own, and their resurgence has been built on the back of his efforts and some of the other junior guys really stepping up and getting into a groove there. So I would not be shocked to see Matty in the mix sooner rather than later. I think the Eels could absolutely use some reinforcements at dummy half. It'd be very interesting to see if he does get picked, how much of a role he gets to carve out, what sort of minutes and how many responsibilities are levied against him. But I do look forward to him playing soon. And ditto for Charlie, who, we literally just spent 5-10 minutes talking about the back row issues the Eels have when it comes to Sean Lane's form, Bryce Cartwright's fitness, and even just the availability of luckless players like Matt Dury, who is now getting back into the rhythm but has been off the field more than he's been on it. Absolutely snake-bitten player there, and it's horrendous luck. So Charlie is going to be a factor as well. And, especially the more games that slip away, and, if Mitchell Moses misses more time, which is now the rumour today is that he's not playing next week, which, then puts him into or out of origin contention, and then maybe he doesn't want to rush back in any way. We don't know where Gufferson's at. Maybe he's going to be back in 2-3 weeks. Maybe he's going to be back longer. Each game and each injury that we get set back means, for mine, it's more likely we see these young guys getting a chance to get into the fold, starting to make a difference and starting to build towards being serious contributors in season 2025. And it sucks to be talking about season 2025 right now, but you got to balance the realism with the optimism. And I think if you're bringing them into the team, that is the real important subtext to it.
Yeah, and I think given that we've talked about the need for pace in the Eels team, the need for mobility, Charlie Geimer brings that in the forwards. And when it comes to the pace, what you have with Woods Arthur is someone who is absolutely fast between the ears and asks lots of questions out of dummy half, creates out of that position. It's one thing for his opposition to be targeting him and watching him all the time. It's another thing for them to be able to stop him, and they certainly haven't been able to do that in New South Wales Cup this season. Clint, your takes on the potential for young players like Buds or Charlie Geimer debuting?
One of the really good, I think it's something that we've discussed before, and anyone who's watched any lower grades football over the course, I'm talking junior reps as well as Cup over the last year and a half, would be lying if they didn't say that Matt Arthur has the best dummy half service at the club. His passing game is crisp, and he's constantly asking questions and probing the right way without ball hogging, for lack of better terminology, than any other hooker option at the club. It's obviously well documented. He probably needs to add a few kilograms to his frame before he's probably considered an out-and-out option for first grade. But that being said, his performances against grown men in New South Wales Cup now, and I think sooner rather than later, is going to force his father's hand and to pick him at some point this year. Likewise, Charlie Geimer has made a really good account of himself, particularly defensively in New South Wales Cup. And it was really encouraging with some of the other boys that have already made their debut to see those guys go through a full NRL game day experience, 'cause that's part of getting them acclimatized and accustomed to what it means to be an NRL player. And normally that's the predecessor to a forthcoming debut. So we'll watch team list in the coming weeks with very keen eyes, and the potential for those guys to whether it's slip into the 22-man squad or even on into the game day squad.
Yeah, one of the interesting things that I noticed with Matt Arthur in the New South Wales Cup game against the Bears was that we've always known that Matt Arthur will tackle low and chop players down, which is what you usually see with players who aren't as big as the props or back rowers that they play alongside of. However, what I noted of interest in that game was that he was actually doing a lot of the high contact wrestle work. So he was catching the players and then wrestling them to the ground. So that was an interesting change in his defensive patterns as well. So not that he doesn't also go in low in tackles, but yeah, he was doing a lot more of that catch and wrestle type role. So and doing it more than effectively. Like there was no one looked like they were targeting him because there wasn't any time players were running at him. He was just dealing with them. So yeah, it's just interesting for people who might be concerned about whether he would be targeted in the NRL due to being both young and smaller in height. But he's certainly put on some kilos in the last 12 months anyway. So he's a stronger player than he was at this time last year. He is a very nuggety build. So he will probably be, I think he's I'm positive he's taller than Reed Marnie. And
Reed had some very generous official measurements, I believe.
Yes. So anyway, look, we'll move on. I think that's just about covered what is more in-depth look at our team list than we normally do in the news podcast. But this brings us to intermission, and we all know what that means.
Look, I just received an award, and before I play the music, and of course, I wanted to reciprocate the love to Lithuania. I want to make sure there is a no refund policy here because I tried damnably hard to find some good music out of Lithuania. And look, they do a lot of things great, but they're the only Baltic state to have never won Eurovision. In 01 and 02, we saw Estonia and Latvia go back-to-back with Everybody and I Wanna. And the reality is that Lithuania's best song at Eurovision was in 06 with a very tongue-in-cheek title, We Are the Winners. And it's not there officially, but in parentheses of Eurovision. If you've ever seen that, it's just literally saying We Are the Winners of Eurovision. So I tried, and Lithuania, you just didn't have the chutzpah there for me to get something out of it. So I've geographically gone close, and I've gone southeast, and this one's a bit of a nerdy one for me, but anyone that is familiar with Chernobyl and the TV series and all the other great stuff that's there, there's obviously that very good TV series and a whole lot of stuff, Call of Duty and whatnot, and the tragic story of the Chernobyl reactor. But there's also a game series called Stalker, which details a sort of parallel world where people go into the radiation zone, and there's some great campfire music from that. So we're going there with a bit of a rustic campfire music, and it's very somber and probably fitting of where we are in the season right now. So, yeah, indulge my little nerd talk there. Yeah, it's a game full of nice, amazing little introspective songs like that. So hopefully you enjoyed that one, and my apologies to Lithuania. I will cherish the award, the very oddly specific award that you gave me this week for the rest of my life, but I couldn't reciprocate the love.
Well, look, I think you still found the sentiment, that European sentiment in your musical interlude selections, mate. So well done on that. And I'm now going to throw back to you for your wrap of round 10 of NRL results.
Yeah, we're getting closer and closer to the halfway point of the season. We hit the double digits on the round counter, and lots of close games this week. Some upsets, some gutsy performances, and it starts on Thursday night. The Dolphins, the little team that could, they obviously spanked the Parramatta Eels a few weeks ago, and they just keep winning. They're getting players back week after week now from that injury pile that they had. It was pretty much a corpse pile on the sidelines for them for a number of weeks. But 30-24 victors over the Manly Warringah Sea Eagles, who have lost Tom Tebojevic for another extended window. Was it hammies again, boys? You talk about luckless players and snake-bitten players, and Tommy's at the head of that pile. The Panthers jumped out to an early lead against the Bulldogs and ended up winning 16-10, a bit closer on the scoreboard than perhaps the game was. Obviously, the Eels went down to the Broncos. Newcastle Knights edging past the West Tigers. The Dragons, or the Dargans, if you're looking at the embroidery on the jerseys. Too good for the Rabbitohs, who are absolute free fall right now. 28-14. There's some unsavory stuff to come out of that game. I'll let you talk about Sixties in terms of off-field behaviour. The Sharks were up against the vastly undermanned Melbourne Storm. They, to Cronulla's credit, they did lose Nico before kickoff, but they won 25-18 on the back of perhaps on the back of a controversial sin binning that, again, I'm sure you'll be chatting about. The Roosters exploded out of the blocks. We're up, I think, 22-0 and after, 12 minutes? 12 minutes against the Warriors. End up winning 38-18. There is controversy out of that game too, the officiating. And then finally, the Titans overcame an injury crisis of their own in this game where they lost 4 players. Was it Brimson, Harley Smith-Shields, Foran, and gosh, who was the fourth they lost in this game?
The 5'8". It was, the halfback.
They lost Brimson and Foran, Harley Smith-Shields, and was it Philip Sami? Who was the fourth?
Philip Sami, yes.
Oh, yeah, and before before the game they had lost their halfback.
Sorry, prior to kickoff. That's right, which is why AJ Brimson switched from fullback to 5'8", and Keanu Keeney came into the starting team, and they jumped out of the blocks to a 20-0 lead and looked like they were going to blow the Cowboys off the park. Injury struck, and again, to their credit, showed plenty of character. Held on 20-18. The Cowboys had the ball at the depth, and I think it was the dummy half? Was it Sam Verrills? It was Sam Verrills who made an incredible tackle on Kyle Felt coming back across the grain, making that cover tackle from the mid of the field. So very good effort there from the Titans, and that gets them off the bottom of the ladder, and they're actually above the Rabbitohs now. So well done there. And on the bye, but re-signing their head coach was the Canberra Raiders.
Yeah, and I just wanted to chime in just with the take on that Titans performance. Losing 4 backs in a game so that you've got both dummy halves playing in the halves. You've got the middle forward who had a bit of a background at dummy half in Aaron Clark going to dummy half. You've got players out of position, and they were at the point where it was almost impossible for them to hold on against the Cowboys, who were finishing fast. But let's face it, they had the ideal position to be able to spread the ball against a team that was almost lacking every one of their back line. And to their credit, that tackle that was made towards the end by Verrills in getting across on the winger Kyle Felt, it was quite, and that was in the last minute of the game. It was quite an incredible finish there. It honestly looked like somehow the Cowboys were going to get out of jail in a win that they wouldn't have deserved. So well done there. Now let's talk about some of the games and the incidents out of the games. Clint, I'm going to go first of all to you with regard to the Harry Grant sin bin and subsequent charging. Is it too much to suggest that this is one of the softest sin bins that has ever existed, let alone penalty, that's ever existed in the game?
Yeah, and Harry and the Melbourne Storm obviously felt as such after the game, so much so that they challenged it at the judiciary. And as of while we've been recording, breaking news that he was successful in getting that overturned.
Jeez.
So,
a week after the officials got absolutely roasted, this happens, and it wasn't the only incident too. There's a couple other things I'm sure we'll talk about. It's not a good look for the game, to the point that Annesley came out and there was some bizarre things revealed this week. Like there's another person in the box that we were never aware of that helps walk through this process about what is the sin bin and whatnot. We'd never heard about the third party official, but here we are. The classic NRL. Like this is what it is, isn't it? We've seen so many attacks on kickers that have been penalty sufficient that are wildly more aggressive than what we saw from Harry Grant, and this one is at the very maximum technically a penalty, and you could have argued against it, but if it had just been penalty, it would have been, you know what, okay, he was in the kick arc, the foot made contact, yeah, the guy sold it, penalty sufficient, move on. But the fact he got sin binned, wow.
Yeah, Clint, it was wild because for a start we saw Harry Grant coming in for a charge down. He wasn't getting there. He then went into a running arc that looked to have him moving away from the kicker, and the kicker in his follow through looked like he was the one making contact with Harry Grant, and it was pretty much the end of the foot. The kicker ends up a little bit off balance and a little bit unsteady as he settles himself and realizes he's not injured. And then we have the outcome of the penalty and the sin bin and the subsequent charging. Over the top for yours as well?
yeah, and it was all in Harry Grant's reaction, wasn't it? It's not often that we're us sitting on here as siding with the plight of the Melbourne Storm, because that in itself is an oxymoron. But in this particular instance, they were very harshly done by, and after the fact, some sanity has prevailed, even though it disadvantages us. It sure would be great that Harry Grant was facing penalty. I don't think he was up for suspension on this charge anyway. But if he was, it certainly would have been advantageous to us. But no, it's good to see that ultimately we've arrived where we should have always been, and hopefully, you hope with these instances it's a lesson for the NRL. But as John just said before, we find ourselves the NRL, that is, constantly in these positions of cognitive dissonance, and it's perplexing, it's strange, and it's frustrating.
And
You know what? I think at some point they have to admit if it just doesn't look right or feel right, it isn't right. It's and you know what? I don't even think this is a case of well, we have to be black and white about this rule, and if there's any contact, that's it, no matter what the contact is. No, because we play a contact sport, and we're heading towards, as we were talking about in the green room earlier, that with some of these rules and future muted changes, like eliminating the kickoff and just having a tap restart after a try, and with the sole purpose of getting rid of the carry back from the kickoff, to supposedly that's going to eliminate a huge number of concussions. Like, in all seriousness, if these changes keep happening, we will be playing league tag. And we understand about protecting players, but
at some point, you just need to acknowledge that there is an intrinsic risk with playing a contact sport like rugby league, and that they're paid commensurately with the risk that they take. Like, they're getting paid hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And if you want to opt out at any point, you can. So I'm all for player welfare, and we've lavished praise on the steps that the game has made in terms of concussion protection and the other stuff that we've done in terms of cracking down on various nefarious, wrestling techniques. But like I said, at some point you have to acknowledge that this is a contact sport. People are going to get hurt. You are paid a lot of money for it. So I don't know. And selfishly, getting back to the core issue here of Harry Grant being sin-binned, it's not like the Melbourne Storm ever have a bad whistle against Parramatta, but God, the timing is just shocking, isn't it? That the Melbourne Storm get reamed in the backside by the officials last week, just in time to take on Parramatta the week after. Like, this stuff you can set to a freaking clock. Like, it is incredible. Incredible. You talk about the stuff that you can't control. Exactly. Like, and I know that there is a intrinsic bias we have when we look at this stuff. Obviously, we're going to be looking at it through the filter of a Parramatta fan, but God, it feels like the odds are just being so stacked against us on stuff that we cannot control right now. Like, they're going to get a golden whistle next week, or sorry, this week. Getting my times mixed up there. Harry Grant is going to get away with murder in the ruck. Like, there ain't no way they're going to be calling him out in anything this week.
Yeah, absolutely true. And it's strange, isn't it? Because if he had have been suspended, if he had have by any chance been suspended, we would have probably been duly jumping for joy, and yet at the same time probably saying, well, that was awful luck. That was horrible. What a bad decision. We'll take it, but that was an awful decision. As it stands now, he's been vindicated in saying, and the Storm saying, this was just the wrong call against him. And we all know it. The average rugby league supporter looks at it and says, well, that call stinks. And it did. And as much as we dislike with great intensity the Storm, as much as Harry Grant is not a favourite player of ours, it doesn't stop us from looking at a game and looking at decisions and acknowledging when a team gets a rough deal, even if sometimes we might be chuckling at teams getting a rough deal, doesn't stop us from acknowledging it and saying, look, the officials got it wrong and the NRL's getting it wrong. We want players to be protected. We want them to, we want safety in terms of concussion protocols, all of that sort of thing. But you're going to get accidents that happen in rugby league. The protection of the kicker is not about concussion protocols. It's just making sure that the player doesn't get taken off his feet into a dangerous position, like has eventuated in the past when players attack the legs of a kicker or make late contact on them. This sort of scenario where you get an accidental contact by a player looking to do a charge down, what are we supposed to do in the end? Is there supposed to be a 1 metre moat around the player to protect them? because we're heading towards that. It's almost like as soon as a player indicates, it's going to be almost like in the old days when you'd call out mark when you'd catch the ball, so that you knew that you got the kick after it. Is it like when the player gets the ball, if he calls out kick, that players aren't allowed to even move towards him?
And you know what the worst part of it is if they keep pushing kick pressure to be softer and softer and no touching, you know that the halves aren't going to respect that. They're going to take advantage of it and start dummying the kick and running and, you know, creating line breaks. You know, this is always the way it is with, you know, rules and the manipulation of any interpretation for an advantage. You know, the teams are looking cynically to get as much advantage as possible. And if you go soft on the kickers, the kickers will respond and manipulate that to their advantage.
Yeah. And as I said, there is no way of avoiding. I mean, they can look at things like the target areas of tackles not being too high, but we know that we get concussions in rugby league from tacklers going in low and their heads hit the wrong part of the opponent. Like, you know, they might hit the hip and hit it at the wrong angle, or players don't use correct technique and their heads go in front of the body rather than to the side or behind the body. We know that there's accidental head collisions with fellow tacklers in contact. We know that with the upright tackling style, that there is occasionally head knocks with the players. These are all things that are pretty hard to avoid. I think there's a point where you can mandate the rules to try to eliminate it. As I said, we're probably heading towards the point where you must tackle from the chest downwards rather than the shoulders. You're just going to get that lower point of first contact. But once you go past that, you're still going to have concussion. So we just have to accept that it's going to be part of the game, and we have to have protocols from there that protect players against themselves in a way, from not coming back too early. And if you've got players with repeated concussions, maybe looking at continuing to look at what the protocols should be for those players who have a history of concussions, just to take care of their welfare.
Future 4020 interjecting here into the older recording of the podcast with a editing edition. Naturally, it wouldn't be a tip sheet recording without some huge news breaking, and fortunately I caught this one in the process of editing and before uploading, but we've since been informed this morning, being the Wednesday morning, 8 o'clock, that David Fifita is no longer going to the Sydney Roosters and is recommitting to the Gold Coast Titans, activating that player clause that started all this trouble at the beginning and staying on the Sunshine Coast there. Well, not really the Sunshine Coast, the Gold Coast. So crazy stuff here. Roosters have put out a statement following the Gold Coast Titans announcing to everyone that he's staying, saying that they've withdrawn their offer to David Fifita following conversations they had with all parties there. So believing that it's in the club's best interests. So it's a bit of we got done dirty sort of a statement if I've ever seen one. But welcome to the NRL, where the news cycle just keeps on churning out absolute bangers. And with that said, I'll let us resume our regular recorded podcast.
Okay, now we move on, and unfortunately, racial abuse has reared its ugly head, John, in the clash between the Dragons and the Rabbitohs, with Latrell Mitchell and Cody Walker allegedly being subjected to that sort of abuse from a spectator at the ground.
Yeah, I mean, I've been staunch on this, and as someone that's been highly critical of Latrell, not so much Cody, although I have been critical of him, but especially Latrell, if this is true, then the hammer needs to come down on those fans, lifetime bans. And if what I recall was correct from NRL tonight, the phrases used, I believe, were, black bastard and then a dog, without any colour inference. But, regardless, I'm not drawing the line at that being okay. Like, that is, it's lighter than some of the other stuff that's been alleged in the past, and it is still in the lifetime ban territory. So if this is true, drop the hammer on him, and it's unfortunate. I take it very seriously. You can, again, you can be very critical of Latrell Mitchell and you can go hard on Latrell Mitchell as a footballer and you don't ever need to bring race into it. So those fans, if they are guilty, then they deserve what is coming to them.
Yeah, Clint.
Oh, well, I've got nothing more to add. I think John summarised it all pretty well there. It's very frustrating that we have to continue to navigate these things, but unfortunately, there's people out there who don't seem to capable of a critical thought and being able to separate their critiques and their criticism of the player and his playing style and the characteristics they're born with, and it's just not acceptable behaviour.
Yeah, look, I've only ever heard of this sort of thing happen once at a game as a spectator with someone around me hurling out racial abuse. But because I've heard it once, I know that it goes on at games. And to be honest, when I heard it myself, it was sickening because the person concerned was unrelenting. And even when called out by the spectators around him, he didn't care. He was declaring anyone on that wanted to tell him to shut up. And of course, eventually that meant that security came and dragged him out, which everyone was cheering for. But it's as people that aren't the targets of it, it actually makes you feel physically ill to hear that sort of racial abuse coming out of people. Like, to think that there are still those in the community that want to say those sorts of things. It's, when you hear it, it's confronting.
Mm-hmm.
It's like there is almost a physical response where, like I said, you want to feel ill. You want to be ill at hearing it. So, as you say, if they are able to identify and confirm that the spectator had done that, yeah, I'm on board for a lifetime ban as well. We just don't need that. Moving forward, this has been a horrendous season when it comes to injuries. It probably doesn't come as a surprise that Tommy Turbo has suffered another hamstring injury. But man, oh man, if there's a player in the modern game who just has such a documented history of injuries, it's the Manly fullback, Clint. I mean, is he ever going to be able to move past it? How old is Tommy Turbo now?
I will pull
He
that
must
up for
be.
you.
He'd have to be mid to late 20s.
Tom Tavoyevich is turning 28 in October.
Yeah, so he's still relatively young in terms of his football career. If he was a player that didn't have a lot of injuries, he might have another 6 or 7 years at the top left in the game. But Clint, geez, it seems never ending, his injuries, and especially of recent years, the hamstring.
Yeah, look, it's hard to see him getting on top of it because history suggests that there's a fundamental problem there that a number of specialists now haven't been able to resolve. I've said, using my own study experience from sport and history working in sport, that I've always thought that he was a quadricep heavy leg guy, meaning that in terms of the balance of his leg muscles, he had to probably develop his hamstrings a little bit more. But there's far smarter people and far smarter and more experienced exercise, be it exercise physiologists, be it the club's trainers and head of performance, that are constantly assessing this stuff than I. And it seems as though it's always around this time of year. It's just when there's that temperature drop after the equinox that it all seems to play up for Tommy. And obviously he had a very unfortunate injury. I think it was even in the game against us in 2022. where he went down. Was it on his shoulder? You gents probably remember better than I. And sometimes that's just bad luck in that instance. But the hamstring itself, that's been recurring for the better part of the last 4 or 5 seasons. And probably the only time it didn't hit him was in his Dally M season, which seems to be the only season in the last 5 years of footy for him that hasn't been affected by injury at any point in time, or at least significantly affected. And and when I say significantly affected, missing 8 or more games in that year. And I don't know what the answer is for him, because if you're the Manly club, you've got, I believe it's like a $1.1 million a year contract tied up in this player, and he's playing 50% of his games each year.
Per game value is abysmal. It's
and you really have to start asking yourself the question: when do we reassess and potentially free ourselves from this liability? And it sounds incredibly harsh to say that, but from a purely business perspective, those are the types of thoughts and conversations, if they haven't been happening, and I'm sure they have been, that they probably need to, because from a cost benefit analysis perspective, they're not getting the value, as John was just alluding to there, out of him every year that they need to. And obviously he's a key player in that squad and in that team and in that club. He's core to their identity. But their success of that team is largely predicated on his availability. And while there's some, as I said before, some unluckiness and randomness to some injuries that he's had, this hamstring in particular continues to be chronic and rearing its ugly head. It seems, if not every year, at least every 18 months.
And Clint and John, I think one of the things that everyone probably suspected about Turbo this year was that he was still hamstrung by the hamstring, because we never really seemed to see him in top flight. He was playing very solid football and having some performances which were influential in the games, but we weren't seeing Tommy Turbo, the brilliant ball runner who was near impossible for defences to get hold of, let alone pull down. Just following on from what Clint had to say there, John, is it too harsh to say that such a brilliant footballer has become a liability to his club?
No. And I wanted to say, before I answer the question seriously, that I hope his manager's out there trying to hammer out a deal with What If, Australia's first hotel booking and accommodation online platform, because Tommy is going to be the biggest what if of the modern era. The talent is undeniable. It's irresistible. And when you've seen him healthy and on the field, he has been a transcendental, player at number one, up there with the GIs and the Haynes and the Slaters in their peak, if not eclipsing them at times. The reality is, though, is that he was playing well within himself this year, perhaps trying to pace himself and get back to a position of familiarity with his body, and it wasn't working. He had good games, but no great games. I don't know if you guys saw it, but his effort against the Dragons was comically bad. He looked like a man that was not confident, like dropping, the Ben Roberts dropping a ball in the open field sort of bad. His best is past him. I don't think that's outrageous to say. And he might recapture runs of play where he shows you that he could still be genuinely elite, whether it's with Manly or someone else. But there is a very tough conversation for Manly to have that Quint, alluded to. And I fear that it's not the same, because Luke Brooks is not anywhere near the same player. But I feel that the kind of paralysis that they would have at the executive level in making that decision would be is, what if he goes elsewhere and gets back to his best? And then, not only do we lose one of the best players in the game, but we look terrible. And I think that's just the risk you got to accept. They cannot be paying a bloke that plays less than half the games a season now that much money. And in Tom's defense, he should not accept anything less than what he can get at max value, because he is that good of a player when he's at his best. So it's just a very awkward situation. Obviously, you don't pity Manly too much because they're our arch rivals, but it sucks to see one of the game's genuinely incredible players, like you said, hamstrung. And unfortunately, barring stepping away from the game completely for a prolonged period of time and undertaking the sort of regenerative therapy that you can't get in Australia, especially under Sports Integrity Australia rules, and getting back to his best, it's hard to see him ever getting back to 100%. We've got a problem, Tom Tebojevic sort of form.
Yeah, and you know what? When we're talking about what he's going through, he's undeniably we talk about his brother Jake being one of the recognised good guys in the NRL, and I don't think it's a stretch to put Tom Turbo in that same category. No player deserves to go through the run of injury
God, no.
that he's going through, and he's probably the player that you'd say deserves much better fortune than what he's going through. It's a raw deal that he's got. As you say, Manly are our arch rivals, but we have to talk about a bloke like him getting a raw deal, because we know that at his best he's a generational player, and where it's almost like any contract that he's under from this time forward is going to be like the sort of contract that when a club offers a rookie player a big deal, because there's no guarantee what you're going to get. There isn't really a track record that says that the player's going to be going to be as good as what you believe they're going to be. It's like you are paying the person on potential, and Manly are now at the point where every year moving forward is paying Tommy Turbo on potential.
Yes.
We're paying you on the potential that you can get in most of a season. And we know that going forward, like when we get to either later this year or early next year, that we're going to get a media narrative about some form of rehabilitation or treatment that Tom's gone through and how it's going to work, and how bright his prospects are. But we also know that there's going to come to a point where he's going to suffer another injury.
Yeah, because the reality is that the NRL is perhaps the single most grueling professional sports competition in the world. The MFL, with the biggest, one of the biggest, football or just, competitive codes, their players are chafing at the concept of playing an 18-game season. And we here in the NRL are not only playing a 27-round season, which I know features multiple buys, but there's also representative football that is being played by those same players in between. They're talking about playing more football, adding more teams. So it is already the most gladiatorial code. It's got one of the highest rates of attrition going around. These guys are going through what's the equivalent of a car crash every week and dragging themselves into the next week. And that's why I say when Bryce Cartwright gets picked this week, that there's no way he's anywhere near fit, let alone anywhere near his best. He is fighting through a huge pain for his shoulder. Same thing with Tom. It's why he will never get back to his best, because the nature of the game won't allow him to be at his best. And, going back to what you said before, Sixties, about his off-field behaviour, and again, you guys might be able to correct me, but I think the worst thing Tom's ever done outside of being a bad photo candidate is that, poor guy's he just pulls faces at the worst times whenever you get him in a photo. The most controversial thing he's ever done was getting beaten in a race on the Manly concourse by old mate Harry. He's been a poster boy for good behaviour off the field. He's been, like you said, a generational talent on it when healthy, and yet he cannot be at his best any longer. And it's some team, assuming Manly cut bait with him at some point, some team will go, we'll take the punt, we can fix him, we'll be able to figure out his hamstrings. And maybe they do, but the odds say that they won't. And they'll be left in the same sort of hellish cycle where when he's on the field and healthy, you've got a guy that will take over a game by himself. But the reality is that, again, the game itself will not allow him to be at his best, because it is a game that is a marathon rather than a sprint. And that, ironically, you see with Nathan Cleary's injury now, again, this will be another season where Penrith have to navigate a tricky midpoint of the season without Cleary, but he's going to come back fresh for the finals. And that's been where their real, you quote say luck, but their strength has been is that they've kept their roster fresh or fresher than anyone else, despite being back-to-back-to-back time champions. They keep them fresh for the finals. And it's a huge point of difference.
Well, that's probably the next talking point for us, Clint, is Penrith without Nathan Cleary for the next couple of months moving forward. You see them navigating it successfully? Is it just a matter of their systems are so good that maybe they won't be as potent, but they will be as effective as they always are?
I think we can come to expect them to continue to be the defensive powerhouse that they have been for the better part of the last half decade. I think where teams will have the opportunity to get them is outscoring them. And, I know that's kind of conflicting thoughts there, but, if you can rattle Penrith as our Eels have done on a couple of occasions, where you get a couple of quick tries early in the game and you force that new halves combination to be chasing points, provided that your own D is somewhat solid. I think Penrith is available there for teams to knock off. We speak about the competition as a whole here this year, and the amount of injuries to not only players but significant players has made a lot of games that, if you were trying to guess the form guide based on the strength of any given team squads and their top 17 being available every single week because there's no injuries and there's no suspensions. I think most supporters would end up with a pretty similar top 8. Maybe some interchangeable themes there at the bottom, and you'd have the same probably 6 teams fighting it out to win the premiership proper. But unfortunately, it doesn't quite unfold that way for the spectators, and we don't always get to see the best of the best going up against each other every week, as we may have done in at least a number of seasons gone by. But it does seem that while opportunities being created for players that maybe not have expected it, and you can probably think of a handful of players from the Dolphins. That's been Trey Full is a classic case of that in more recent weeks. Is that now there's like legitimate, this is a coin toss, or wow, this game that in all other normal circumstances would absolutely go this team's way actually looks more favored for this team, and it's kind of crazy to think. And Penrith's are probably the one team that have been immune to that, and I say that until now because we're about to head into the origin period where you'd imagine they'll be once again strongly represented with a couple of forwards, and without Cleary either side of that, the pressure mounts a little bit more on some of those players, and particularly if this is the origin series where Dylan Edwards gets picked. Personally, he's not in my origin team if I was asked to put forward my team at the moment, but he featured in the Kangaroos end of season games last year, and he's as good a chance as any other player getting picked. His own form has been pretty impressive this year, so he's an even money chance of getting picked. But it's becoming increasingly harder, sort of like that, and that ever decreasing circle for them where. Maybe this year might be the year where it becomes just a little bit more difficult for them. And, their depth isn't what it was last year or 2 or 3 years ago. So, it'll be interesting to see how they navigate another period without Nathan.
Yeah. And you've just been mentioning Origin there, Clint. You've just provided the segue as we come to Women's Origin, which takes place this Thursday, game 1 in what is now a 3-game series, and rightfully so with the women's series. John, it's very, very difficult for the women where their Origin series begins well before their season kicks off. So you've got players coming in without any recent games. They're coming in, therefore, without form, so they're being selected based on last season's form. And so no one can really press their claims in terms of how they're performing on a weekly basis right now. It also, I think, makes it hard to build up any hype for the game in the same way that the men's game builds up. Is there a solution to this, do you think? I mean, actually, first of all, let's congratulate Parramatta's representative in halfback Rachel Pearson. But just moving to what can be done to improve the scheduling, is there an answer, do you think, John?
I think ultimately it's going to be about bringing the NRLW into alignment with the NRL. Whether that's going to be a complete one-to-one remains to be seen, given that they're talking about 20 teams is the latest goss in the NRL, which means a monster season. So maybe you can't bring it into complete alignment, but maybe you can start it at a point that would then dovetail nicely into a parallel origin series, and maybe not, one-to-one both on the same day, but within the same week. It's going to be one of the big problems that comes with continuing to hype up this aspect of the game, because we know that the product is quality. The women's state of origin over the last number of years has been, every bit as entertaining as the blokes. And that's just the problem, is getting the first game hyped up. And I suppose with the benefit of a 3-game series is that a good result in the first game gives promotional material for the next 2 games. So that's one of the real positives about moving to the 3-game format, the BO3 format, which is something that we've advocated for ever since we had the BO1 or best of 1 series going way back now. What I will say is that this year presents a very interesting juxtaposition, because on the New South Wales side, as we've spoken with Steve Georgialis on several occasions, Sixties, the Harvey Norman's Women's Premiership is in alignment with the NRLW, sorry, which means that there is no preseason, there is no any sort of, like as you alluded to, track record or form to go off. But I believe that on the Queensland side, their state competition has actually been running. So they're going to come into this one with a bit more match fitness, maybe some connections being baked into based on what club certain players are participating in. Whereas the Blues are coming in genuinely ice cold and just relying on an extended training camp to get them into shape for this game and get those combinations sizzling. So maybe that sort of, on top of the home field advantage that they get coming out of Suncorp, lends this one towards Queensland being the favourites for game 1. But the beauty of this year is that we do have the 3-game series, so there is a chance to mount a comeback if you drop game 1. But going to be very curious to see how the 2 teams play, given their respective preparations on both a state level and a representative level here.
Yeah, Clint, we know that if this was a mid-season fixture, that in the lead up to it, we'd probably be talking about which players are staking their claims for selection. And then when the teams come out, we're going to be debating who's fortunate to get selection, who's unlucky to miss out, who are the options should the Blues not get the win. What's the alternatives for the selectors, for the coaches? It's a different scenario when the last game that we're talking about is from last year for the majority of these Blues players. So, what's your expectations for Thursday night?
It's hard to have any expectations, because there's no real form guide to follow with it. So it asks the question and begs the question of what then influences the team selections, and you'd have to assume that it's on the basis of 1, which players are available, and 2, which players are fit. After that point in time, it's probably a rolling average of who's capable of handling that level of football, because without any real footy preceding the team selections, more so from the New South Wales perspective and the Queensland perspective, as John had just explained, it's kind of like pulling a couple of names out of the hat almost, and I don't want to unfairly misrepresent that being the case, but in lieu of any other information, would be interesting to know what informs those decisions. And then subsequently, on the basis of that, say New South Wales were to lose, well, then where do you go in terms of picking other players? Because you obviously had a thought process that led to those selections in the first place. And then suddenly, if they don't then perform, do you renege on that, or you have to challenge those beliefs and then possibly make some changes? You don't have the benefit of ongoing footy to help inform your decision-making process.
Yeah, it's a tough ask, I think, for this first Origin game. Let's look at the positive. They've got what they deserve, which is, first of all, standalone fixtures, and secondly, that they have a 3-game series. So there are steps being made to move it in the right direction. We just need it from as far as the development of the game is concerned, to be able to finally align where you've got matches that have preceded the team, the selections and the staging of these games. Fellas, very quickly, we've certainly been a very full podcast again this week, but we've got Magic Round this week just to wrap things up. John, quick take: is it still an exciting time of the year? Does it grab your attention as much as it has in the past, or is it starting to wane for you, or is that waning something to do with where our Eels are at?
No, to be brutally honest, Magic Round was always a pretty thing for me. I know there was a lot of hype about it, and the concept is fun. Don't get me wrong. My brother goes to Brisbane every year for his mates. It doesn't always make out the Para games, but he loves making a carnival of it and going out for the whole weekend, and finding a Airbnb location and sort of making a real fellas weekend of it within reason. So obviously there's a market for it.
And our own Mitch Clark.
Mitch, exactly. If you've got a young family and you want an excuse to get up to Brisbane for a holiday and sort of tie football into it, it obviously works really nicely. This is part of a larger problem, but given that we already farm out one of our home games, to Darwin, I am loath to part with a second home game, and I know that doesn't happen every year; it's every other year. But I also, hate getting farmed out to the Melbourne Storm at the one place they perform better than Amy Park at Suncorp Stadium. Well, so yeah, I'm not a big fan of Magic Round in that sense. I understand why it's popular, but yeah, it's a gimmick, and kind of like the Nines format too, where I would love to see Nines come back at some point, but if you keep doing it and you just bang it every year, and especially at the same venue, it sort of, I think it does overstay its welcome.
Yeah, well, I think we've been fortunate because we haven't given away a home game for Magic Round.
Well, we consider that comment retracted, but I do have another gripe. Why are we always scheduled the last game or close enough to the last game on Sunday?
Yeah, that's not good. That's not good. And I think, I'm not 100% certain, but I'm sure it's something that I did pick up over the years, that teams can nominate that it's their home game that goes to Magic Round. And I think there is
a financial compensation.
A financial compensation.
Yeah, well, what about the Manly Seagulls? They farm their game out to bloody Brisbane. Like, they give up a home game to take on the home team. Like, that isn't. You talk about the Darwin situation. That is every bit as insane as the Darwin situation to me.
Yeah. So, anyway, Clint, have you got any thoughts on Magic Round?
Yeah, and John alluded to what they were going to be just then. Or sorry, actually, it might have been you, Sixties, who alluded to what they were going to be just then. Why is it that we always get the Sunday game after the field has been worn down? I mean, I get that we're in a. Yeah, I get that we're we're a team that rates well, and when you're organising the NRL draw, that you go, it'd probably be good to have these guys on the Sunday afternoon game. With our team, I would be more than happy for us in Magic Round to be the Thursday night game. I would love that to be the first cab off the rank. we can hit our quota for Thursday night games in this round as an away side, move on. That would be great. As it is, I think every single year we've been the Sunday afternoon game after the field's been well and truly worn in, and likewise, I'm pretty certain each year that we have played it. Oh, sorry, I should say it was only the previous game against the previous time we played Melbourne, rather, that was a Saturday night, so it was still in the middle of Magic Round there, being the late game in that one. But that didn't do us any favors because we were absolutely touched up and a half in that particular game.
Who beat us in that game?
Yeah, when Melbourne touched us up.
Well, that game didn't happen. I know what he's talking about.
Yeah. I tried to forget that.
So it would be nice to have an earlier game, and against a side that isn't it isn't essentially a home away from home for them.
Yeah, I guess we can find issues for us with any game, or it might seem like we can in this season, but I think there's genuine gripes that we can have, even if we were having a good season. We could find issues with having to take a game to Darwin. We can find genuine issues with getting a Magic Round game that occurs at the end of the weekend after the field's been torn to shreds. But I guess that's the NRL. Anyway, fellas, I think we've well and truly covered the main stories floating around the Eels and the NRL, and this has again been a jam-packed podcast. We've probably come to the end of it. How are we running for time there, John?
You don't want to know.
Roughly.
You don't want to know.
I've got a suspicion we're heading for the 2-hour mark with this one.
Heading for is past tense at this point.
Oh, okay. Well, let's wrap it up. Fellas, thank you for another fine podcast. Thank you to the listeners. If you've stayed with us all the way through, maybe you've had to do it in about 4 different listens, whatever the case may be. There's probably not too many people out there that have to do a 2-hour drive to or from work, which is when a lot of people I know do listen to the podcast. If you listen to it as a way of going to sleep, maybe it's going to take you about 8 listens to get through this. It might be this time next week that you finish this podcast. Anyway, we thank you for sticking with us. Thank you to our sponsors, which is Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta. Great sponsors to Greg and the team out there. Can't thank them enough. And as I always say, go you mighty Eels.